Dr. Brett McDermott. He's a researcher and psychiatrist who specialises in young people with mental health challenges. He joins us from Hobart, Australia. Dr. McDermott, thank you for your time. Is it possible to compare the resilience of children to adults?
Well, it is, but I mean, it's difficult because children obviously, don't have the cognitive capacity, don't have the life experience. They look very much to adults to how they should respond. And by the way, they're going to look very closely to teachers to give them a kind of an idea of what's normal and what's not, and how to go about their day-to-day business.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking exactly the same thing, that a child may not have the philosophical ability to think through what has happened, whether they've experienced it themselves or whether they've seen it happening on TV. And actually, in that regard, what do you think about the age of a child who might be allowed to watch what's been happening in southeastern Türkiye? If they're not from that part of the country, should they be allowed to watch those scenes
Yeah.
unfolding?
The most important thing about watching these disastrous things is not watching them alone and watching it with someone who can actually help them understand it. We've had examples around the world where children thought that there were 10 tsunamis, where there was only one tsunami from a different camera angle, or 20 earthquakes, but there was one earthquake shown in different places and from different angles. So the really important thing about consuming media for younger children, anyone under the age of a teenager, is someone sitting beside them and someone helping them to understand what they're actually experiencing.
Yes, absolutely. So, how does one communicate with a child and educate them about the dangers of earthquakes or indeed what they've been watching unfolding in southeastern Turkey without scaring them?
Well, I think that, as adults, it's incredibly frightening. I think, you know, the reality is that when kids go back to school, there's going to be a lot of shared grief, there's going to be a lot of shared anxiety. And I think the thing to do is to try to put some sort of boundary around it. We work a lot with teachers, we say this is going to happen, but maybe only half an hour is allowed to talk about your experience, about your grief, about your anxiety. And you can even write it in a book. And you can, after half an hour, close the book and put it on a shelf and say, we'll talk for another half an hour tomorrow or another half an hour this afternoon. But the rest of the time, we're going to go back. We're going to have our class. We're going to sit down and do our usual things. Even if there's no roof over our head, we'll try to be like a school, and we won't allow people, to talk about it for 24 hours a day, because that's what their little brains want to do. Their brains will want to keep talking about it and keep kind of trying to make it feel better. We're getting adults and teachers to try to put some boundaries around that.
Does a teacher have to almost put their own grief to one side and almost show a different face, that normal face of being a teacher? In other words, smiling and showing a child that school is a place to be with friends and where you have support, where you can learn but also play.
Teachers, do amazing jobs all the time. And unfortunately, this year is going to be a horrible year. This is a marathon. It's going to take 2 or 3 years. And teachers, I wouldn't say smile, because any child will know that now's not the time to smile, but to be matter of fact, to be, we're here and we're going to talk about the trauma for half an hour, but the rest of the time we're going to be serious students and serious teachers, and we're going to, do what we normally do, and we're going to enjoy drawing or painting, we're going to enjoy physical things, but we're going to try to do business as usual. Now, for the teachers, them looking after themselves as best they can is just crucial. For one of those incredibly respected people in children's lives, teachers, um, to show too much of not coping, even though that's the obvious thing to do. We need to try to help teachers to get through the day, to get through the week, to get through the months as best they can. And teachers know this. Children will look to them for their direction emotionally.
How might stress in a child manifest itself? What should a teacher be looking out for, apart from the obvious of a child possibly crying or screaming?
Yeah. Different things at different ages. The very young children will be what we call developmentally regressed. The young children will be acting 2 or 3 years younger than what they are. They might be talking in baby words. They might have forgot to put on, they used to be able to put on their shoes, but they can't put on their shoes now. They used to be able to feed themselves, but now they want assistance feeding. So young children get developmentally regressed, and it's pretty obvious to see they were 7, but they're acting 4. Now, middle-aged kind of children, they're a bit more obvious. They're anxious. They're clinging to parents, clinging to other students, very quickly upset, often for no reason at all, and obviously hypervigilant. So they're walking around looking for danger all the time. They're hypervigilant. Um, and often in their schoolwork, they only draw pictures of earthquakes or buildings or destruction, or it comes out in their production. Teenagers are a bit easier. Teenagers, if you can get them to talk, they will tell you about what they're experiencing.
Yeah, I mean, in a sort of situation like this, does it become more difficult for a child because there isn't anyone directly to blame? In certain situations, it might be easier for a child to deal with the trauma because they can pinpoint exactly who caused that trauma. But here,
Yeah,
it's a natural disaster, of course.
yeah. Actually, sometimes a little bit the opposite. Sometimes natural disasters, and people of faith, this is an act of God at one level. Sometimes children find actually that's easier to understand, that it's a natural disaster. I mean, some, man-made disasters like, a car accident, they actually find that a little bit more difficult. Children actually find war really difficult to understand because that's clearly adults fighting each other. Natural disasters, they can sometimes, cognitively work through a little bit more easily.
Brett, actually, speaking of war, do you think that possibly the children in Syria may be reacting in a slightly different way? Just slightly different in their mental approach? Because
Mm.
for those living in the northwest of the country, many of them will have been born during a time of war and will not have known anything else.
Yeah, yeah. Look, I think adversity is cumulative. I think that you can have adversity on top of adversity on top of adversity. We know that's incredibly bad for the brain. We know it's incredibly bad for your stress system. It actually also changes your genetics. We now know that the stress can change how your genes work. So those very unfortunate children who have had war followed by natural disaster, they will be reacting in a in it's likely that they will be reacting in a much more problematic way. They will get anxious more easily. They will get upset more easily. Their levels of depression might be more profound. Um, Tragically, they might be doing much worse.
Dr. Brett McDermott, thank you, Brett, for sharing your expertise with us. Really, really appreciate it.